The Forgotten Path, a story of the Orishas. In the time before time, when the world was still young, the Orishas walked among mortals, guiding them in the ways of wisdom, strength, and balance. The heavens, the earth, and the seas were ruled by their will, each Orisha governing their domain with power and purpose. One day, Ogun, the fierce Orisha of iron and war, stood upon a mountain watching the humans below as they built their villages. He saw their struggles, hunger, sickness, and conflict. Frustrated, he raised his mighty blade and struck the ground, splitting the earth as he roared, "Why do they not use the gifts we have given them?" From the sea, Yamaya, the mother of all, emerged in a wave of blue light. Her voice was calm as the ocean breeze. "Patience, Ogun. They must learn in their own time." But Ogun did not listen. He descended to the villages and gifted the humans weapons, strong and sharp. He taught them how to forge iron, build great tools, and defend themselves. But soon the villagers turned his gifts against each other, waging war over land and pride. Seeing the destruction, Obatala, the wise Orisha of creation and purity, stepped forward. Dressed in white, he spread his hands over the land, calming the rage of men. "Ogun, you have given them strength, but not wisdom. Power without balance leads to ruin." Ogun frowned, but he understood. He retreated into the forests to reflect on his actions. It was then that Orunmila, the Orisha of wisdom and divination, stepped forward. He whispered secrets of destiny to the humans, teaching them to seek knowledge before wielding power. "All things must be in harmony," he said. With time, the villages flourished. They built great cities, not just with iron but with wisdom. They learned that strength must be guided by knowledge, and passion must be tempered with patience. The Orishas watched from above, pleased, but one among them, Eshu, the trickster, only smiled. "Balance is fleeting," he mused. "Let us see how long it lasts." So the cycle of wisdom and folly continued, as it always has, as it always will. Eshu's laughter ebbed through the heavens, a sound both light-hearted and ominous. He turned away from the others, his steps carrying him to the crossroads where all fates converged. As time passed, the humans thrived, their cities growing tall and their knowledge deepening. But, as Eshu had predicted, balance is fleeting. With wisdom came pride, and with strength came ambition. One day, in a great city at the heart of the land, a king sat upon a golden throne. He was once a humble leader, but now his heart was heavy with desire. He wished not just to rule his own people, but all people. Eshu's trickery. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a traveler arrived at the palace gates. He wore a cloak of red and black, his eyes glimmering like stars caught in mischief. "Great king," the traveler said, bowing low. "I have come from distant lands to offer you knowledge that even the Orishas keep secret." The king leaned forward, intrigued. "And what secret is that?" "The secret of dominion," Eshu whispered, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. The king, blinded by his thirst for power, listened eagerly. Eshu spoke in riddles, weaving truths with half-lies, urging the king to forge weapons greater than Ogun had ever taught, to send his people beyond their lands, and to take what he believed was rightfully his. The next morning, the city's forges burned hotter than ever. Armies marched, not for protection, but for conquest. The Orisha's warning. Far above, the Orishas watched with heavy hearts. Ogun clenched his fists, recognizing the same mistake repeating itself. Yamaya's waters stirred with sorrow. Obatala, the Orisha of purity and creation, stepped forward once more. "We must intervene before they undo all they have built." But Orunmila, the wise Orisha of divination, held up a hand. "No," he said, "they must learn. They must choose." And so the Orishas did not act, not yet. The cost of hubris. As the years passed, war spread like wildfire. Kingdoms rose and fell, and the rivers ran red with the blood of warriors. The once flourishing cities were scarred by greed and betrayal. One day, in the ruins of a once great palace, an old man sat beneath a withered tree. He had once been a king, but now he was nothing. Eshu appeared before him, the same playful smirk on his lips. "You have seen much, old friend," he said. "Tell me, what have you learned?" The fallen king looked up, his eyes filled with regret. "That power without wisdom is a curse. That knowledge without humility is destruction." Eshu's laughter rang out, but this time there was no malice in it. "Ah," he said, crouching beside the man. "Now you understand." The trickster Orisha stood and turned toward the horizon. "Come," he said, motioning for the old man to follow. The path is not forgotten, only lost, and even lost things may be found again. As they walked, the first drops of rain fell from the sky, washing the dust from the land. High above, the Orishas watched, hopeful once more. Balance had been broken, but it could yet be restored. The rain fell gently over the scarred land, washing away the dust of destruction, but not the memories of what had been lost. The old king, now just a wanderer, followed Eshu as they walked beyond the ruins of his once great city. His feet, weary from years of ruling and warring, now tread a new path, one of reflection. Eshu, ever the trickster, walked with a lightness that defied the weight of the past. He whistled a tune as they journeyed, his red and black cloak flowing like a living flame. Tell me, old friend, Eshu mused, glancing back at the fallen king, do you regret it all? The king sighed, his voice heavy. I regret losing myself. Eshu chuckled. A king who sees his own folly? Now that is rare. As they walked, the landscape began to change. The ruins faded into wild lands, forests untouched by war, rivers that still ran clear, and hills where laughter still echoed. Here, villages still thrived, untouched by the greed that had consumed the great cities. The village of the forgotten. Eventually, they arrived at a small village nestled in the valley. It was nothing like the grand kingdoms the old king had once ruled, yet it pulsed with life. Children played in the dirt, farmers worked the land, and elders shared wisdom under the shade of great trees. The people did not recognize the old man who had once been their ruler, and he did not tell them. Instead, he watched them, listened to their stories, and saw something he had long forgotten: contentment. Eshu, standing at the village gates, grinned. You see, power builds towers, but wisdom builds homes. The old king nodded slowly. And yet they do not seek conquest, they do not crave more. Because they remember, Eshu said, his voice carrying a rare note of seriousness. Not all must be lost to be learned. The test of the Orishas. High above, the Orishas watched. Yamaya, seeing the king's transformation, let her waters flow peacefully once more. Obatala, ever the guide of creation, turned to Orunmila. Shall we test him? Obatala asked. Orunmila nodded. A man may see his mistakes, but will he make them again? And so the Orishas set their test. One morning, as the village awoke, a traveler arrived, a warrior in need, his people starving. He knelt before the village elders and begged for their aid. The villagers murmured among themselves. They had little, but they had peace. Sharing might invite trouble. The old king, standing among them as one of their own, felt the familiar pull of power. Once, he would have seen this as an opportunity to take, to rule, to grow. Instead, he stepped forward and said, we will help as we can, but we will not take what is not ours. Eshu, watching from the shadows, grinned. The path remembered. That night, as the old king sat by the fire, Eshu approached once more. You passed, old friend, the trickster said. You chose differently. The old king looked into the flames. Because I am different. Eshu nodded. Then perhaps it is time you had a name once more. And so, the old king did not return to his throne. Instead, he stayed with the village, guiding them not with power, but with wisdom. He did not rule, he taught. And far above, the Orishas smiled, for the path was no longer forgotten. It had been found again. Far above, the Orishas smiled, pleased with the old king's transformation. But Eshu, ever the trickster, tilted his head with curiosity. Balance is fleeting, he murmured to himself. While the village thrived in peace and wisdom, the world beyond its borders was still shifting. Greed had not vanished from men's hearts. Across the rivers and over the mountains, other kingdoms grew restless. Some heard whispers of the village's prosperity, of an aging king who no longer ruled but taught. And where there is peace, there are always those who seek to take it. The gathering storm. One evening, as the village prepared for rest, a scout arrived, breathless with urgency. Riders approach from the east, he said. Armed men, many of them. The villagers gathered, murmurs of fear rising like wind through the trees. They had no army, no fortress, only their homes and their wisdom. The old king listened in silence, his hands resting upon his knees. He had seen war before. He had led armies. He had taken and conquered. But this was not his kingdom. The village elders turned to him. What should we do? He looked at them, then at the frightened faces of the children, at the hands of the farmers who had built, not destroyed. He took a deep breath. We will not fight, he said. Gasps spread through the crowd. "We will not fight," he repeated, standing now, "but we will not bow to greed either. If these men come seeking to take what is not theirs, they will find no battle, but neither will they find submission. A trickster's gamble." That night, as the wind howled through the village, Eshu appeared at the old king's fire once more. "You surprise me," he said, crouching beside the flames. "You have the mind of a warrior, yet you would meet swords with words?" The old king looked at him. "You once told me power builds towers, but wisdom builds homes. This village is my home." Eshu smirked. "Then let us see how strong your wisdom truly is." The next morning, as the sun bled across the horizon, the riders arrived. Dozens of them, clad in armor and bearing spears, their leader astride a black horse. His face was hardened by years of battle, his eyes sharp as a predator's. "I have heard of this village," the warlord called, "of its peace, and I have come to claim it as my own." The villagers stood together, unarmed but unshaken. The old king stepped forward, his hands empty, his voice steady. "You may take what is freely given," he said, "but what you try to steal will never be yours." The warlord scoffed. "I do not ask, I take." Eshu, unseen by the soldiers, leaned against a tree, watching with interest. He had seen many men beg for mercy, many plead, many break. But the old king only smiled. "You take," he said, "because you believe you lack." The warlord narrowed his eyes. "What nonsense is this?" The old king stepped closer. "You have spent your life conquering, and yet you still search. What is it you have not found?" A murmur passed through the warlord's men. A flicker of something unreadable passed over the leader's face. "I have found power," he snapped. "And yet you are still searching," the old king replied. "If power satisfied, you would not be here." Silence stretched between them. The warlord gritted his teeth. "You speak like a man who has lost everything," the old king nodded, "and that is how I learned what truly matters." The warlord hesitated. His men watched, waiting for his command. The old king gestured toward the village. "Stay with us a while, see what we have, and if it is still something you wish to take, then take it." The unseen hand of fate. Above, the Orishas watched. Obatala, ever patient, folded his arms. "This is not the way of kings and conquerors," Oromila nodded. "No, it is the way of men who have learned." And Eshu, watching as the warlord slowly dismounted, as his soldiers hesitated, as war melted into curiosity, only laughed. Balance is fleeting, but sometimes it returns in unexpected ways.